Welcome back to another episode of the Grace Fellowship Podcast. Glad you're joining us. We are continuing on this fall. We're deep into the fall. Everything's a go. Football's in full swing, and we're finishing up our connection point classes. We've got 2 more left of those, and so if you're a part of those, make sure you get your testimonies in and member covenant in to Jacob Pullen so that he can get everything ready. We also, in just a little over a month, have the Reformation celebration coming up, which is super exciting. October 30th.
October
30th. We'll be doing that here this year. And, of course, our sister churches will be coming to that. But we're going to do it a little different this year. Kind of excited about what we're going to do as far as the service. We're going to make it a little more tailored to children. So we know a lot of kids are going to be here, and parents, you're probably really focused in on your kids while they're here. So what we're going to try to do for that service is kind of a story, church history story David's going to bring. Carlton and I are actually going to dress up, and we won't tell you who yet, but we're going to dress up and kind of be goofy and funny, but also give some real good substance about church history and why we have the Reformation and why it's so important that we understand what happened way back then, and so that we keep guard from moving that way now. And so we want you to be a part of that. That's October 30th. So just go ahead and put that on the calendar, and you definitely will make plans to be there. So jumping back into our podcast, what we've been talking about over the past several weeks is this Christ-centered stuff. We've talked about Christ-centered worship, Christ-centered preaching, Christ-centered sanctification, Christ-centered discipleship, and marriage, parenting, all these kind of things with Christ at the center of all of them. And we think that's super important because we think that He is, as Colossians 1 says, whom all things were created through and whom all things were created for, right? Mm-hmm. And so He must be at the center for things to work rightly, but He's also deserving of our worship, and we know that the goal of our redemption is that we would be conformed to His image, is what the Scriptures tell us. And so I want to kind of take all of those thoughts and move them toward where we've been in our sermon series over the past several weeks. In Romans 6, we've been having the sermon series on holiness. And man, holiness is so important. We've had really good sermons so far about holiness, about sanctification. And so what I want to pose this morning is, as we talk about being conformed to the image of Christ, is just jump out there with you guys. What is holiness? How would you define holiness? How would you, if somebody asks you, I see that, in the Scriptures we're supposed to be holy, but what is that? What is holiness? Carlton, you want to jump off there?
Well, the first simplest is set apart.
Okay.
Different, set apart, otherness, we might say. And really, scripturally and otherwise, holiness is the purest definition of who God is.
Okay.
Holiness is not an attribute of God. It is who God is.
That's good.
And so the Scriptures, the praise that goes before Him by the angels every moment of every day is that He is holy, holy, holy. We see that refrain not only in Isaiah but in Revelation, where the angels are just constantly calling out to God's holiness. The words for holiness, the word group is used over 600 times, and it's mainly in reference to God, first and primary, and then to God's people. So that's really what holiness is.
So if we could kind of frame that up, you would say that God's holiness is kind of all of His attributes, what make Him up. He is set apart. There's no one like That's Him. Right. Okay. David, anything to add to that? Maybe what that might be practically or whatever?
Yeah, a conversation I was having with one of our members yesterday, we were talking about how God is unchanging, and that has just really been rocking his world.
Yeah.
And in talking through that, understanding that God's holiness doesn't change. Like, He is holy. He can't be any more holy, and He's definitely not going to be any less holy.
Wow, okay.
He is holy. And at the same, like, in us discussing this, it's like everything in our life is always changing.
Yeah.
Like, our taste buds are changing. The sky's never the same. The food will, because our taste buds are changing, will taste differently. The sunset never looks the same. Like, everything is always changing. And so to think on a God who is unchanging is hard to do. It's hard to comprehend. And then on the reverse side of that, like we are always changing, being sanctified more into that holiness that is never changing from God. He's changing us more into His image. And that's just a beautiful thing to think on. And he and I were just having this worshipful moment thinking on that and praising God for that. And so I think that's just something for us to consider in this is like we shouldn't stay the same in where we are in our walk with Christ. Like we should be changing more and more into that image of Christ, conforming to His holiness.
Pursuit of holiness,
and thinking on that day when we will be holy as He is holy. And,
wow.
And so, yeah.
So you guys have talked a lot about, and we haven't dug all into the nuances of His character. You guys just kind of sum that up. But I think culturally when we hear the word holy, right, like there's probably a lot of different ideas, maybe not from Christians. Maybe Christians have a good understanding, but I don't even know there, because I think growing up, every time I heard the word holy, I just thought hands folded, appropriate clothing, and act right, like, and it was kind of like nothing I wanted to do as a kid. Yeah. But as I've grown up and as I've gotten in the scriptures, I've seen that holiness is beautiful. Yeah. Like to be like when we say God is holy, what we're saying there is in all of His attributes, He's supreme. Right? Like he's the best it can possibly be. Like you said, David, he's so awesome in love, He can't get any more loving, right? And we definitely know He's not getting any less. Right. And so it's just this supreme nature. So maybe you speak to some of that, maybe the misunderstandings of the pursuit of holiness and what that means. And maybe even if you guys want to talk about where we get kind of those misconceptions of what it means to be holy.
Yeah, I think that the thing you said just a minute ago about God's attributes, we often think of them more or less, like He's more love than He is another just. He's more of the, but God is perfectly simple in the sense that every one of His attributes is perfectly balanced at the maximum. Not balanced in the middle, but balanced at the maximum. It couldn't be anymore. So when we say, what is love? God is the very definition of love. When we say, what is justice? God is the very definition of justice. Without God, then we wouldn't even know those things. Wow. We wouldn't know mercy except God is mercy. Man. We wouldn't know grace except God is grace. We wouldn't know wrath except God is wrathful. Yeah. So these things, that's what sets Him apart. That's His otherness, is that He is the definition of what it means to be those very things. And so the way it shows forth, I think the holiness of God shows forth in His glory. And so when we think about weightiness, His glory is weightiness, His substance, His imprint is on everything. So when we think about that, we can then move over to the imaging of God through humanity. God has impressed His image on mankind so that He was intended to reflect back to God the beauty of His holiness, the beauty of His glory, the magnificence of His character. That was what we were originally created for. Now we've been marred and twisted by the fall into sin, so that, I think a way to see it is, if you think about a mirror which reflects back the light of God's glory, when sin happened, someone took a sledgehammer and we took a sledgehammer and hit the mirror. So now the mirror is fragmented. It's not that we can't ever catch a glimpse of God likeness in our character, but it's broken, it's shattered, it's imperfect. And God is in the process through His work of sanctification of making us, declared us, and now placed us in Christ, and He is transforming us into a complete picture. So when you get around someone who's been walking in their salvation and walking it out in practical ways, more of the mirror has come together. Yeah. So now you're seeing more and more, and that's really, when you put it that way, you think, well, as a Christian, who wouldn't want to be that? Yeah. Who wouldn't want to be the person that God has placed more pieces together so that people see more Christ-likeness from you? Yeah.
So in that regard, if taking his analogy with the picture or the mirror, David, it gets broke right into a bunch of pieces, and we know that no longer displays the holiness of God, right? Imaging Him rightly. But talk to us, David, some about so we would call that mirror now unholy,
That's right.
Yeah, so it's not holy, it's not perfect, so it must be unholy. So now that mirror broken is unholy. But David, maybe talk about some of the effects of unholiness. Like if we look across the world, we have so many stinking problems. There's not just one problem. There's not just a dozen. There's a bazillion. And talk about the effects of that unholiness and how maybe it scatters out.
Yeah, you see just the disease of sin just spread. We talk about a lot of people use cancer as an analogy for sin, and it just the way it spreads, and that's the way the unholiness goes throughout the world. It's just this darkness. If there's not light there, there's darkness there, and even the shade is a form of darkness to where it's not a pure light, and so that spreads everywhere. I mean, when you're living in sin. You are stained. You are not pure. You're not this form of holiness that you were intended to be.
Okay, so yeah, jumping off that, let me ask you a qualifying question.
Okay.
You brought in sin, and I think when we were talking about holiness, we're talking about like imaging the perfectness of God. So how would you help me understand sin in that light? Like obviously we can give a definition of sin, but in that light, what would sin be?
Yeah, so God cannot sin. Jesus never sinned, so there's just pure holiness there, the purity of who God is. And because of sin, we are not holy. I mean, that's what is the disqualifier from holiness.
Yeah.
So
we would define sin as
any transgression or lack of conformity to the law of God.
Okay.
The law of God being God's character.
So our new city catechism.
Catechism.
Answer our kids know is what is sin. It's disobeying God.
Okay.
And that is, I mean, he clearly gives us ways of obeying him and how we disobey him. So when we're disobeying God, living in sin, then we are not imaging him.
Okay.
We are not reflecting that holiness. We're cracking our mirror. Our mirror is being cracked, and that's So
and the lack of conformity too. So transgression is an active thing which we seek to disobey, but we also can be disobedient or lacking conformity to just by our very being. Yeah. We're not actually trying. We're not. Cognizantly in the front of our brain thinking, I'm going to disobey God. Let me go figure what. Just by living outside of Christ, we're disobeying God.
Wow.
It's just the way we are. It's our natural inclination in our fallen state to not reflect God, but rather to seek glory for ourselves, to draw the light in rather than reflect the light out. So we want to be seen as great. We want to be seen as big. And so we're rivaling God. That's really what we're doing. We're at war against God from our very being. So his holiness to the maximum is to this side. Now I know we're going to get into moral, but just in our state of being, we're to the maximum unholy. We're as far from the chasm, the separation between God's otherness and who we are as human beings. It couldn't be any further. If you stood on the rim of the Grand Canyon on the north side and looked to the south, you can't even see the south end. But then you had a flyover, that wouldn't be a far enough separation. You put the Pacific Ocean between this continent and that continent. It's not; those examples fall short, and that's what it means to be unholy. So we're as far away. And so that's what makes God's otherness so great, is that it's inaccessible completely. And yet, he, through Christ, came to us to carry us, Peter says, to God. And so through his beautiful, amazing, we could pile up the adjectives to his sacrifice and his coming. He stepped down out of that Shekinah glory. He stepped down out of that equality position-wise, put on flesh, became a servant unto death, the death of a cross, the total condescension into the depths of the very unholy, without being unholy, the unholiness. And what he does is rescues his people from that and takes them to, he ascends back to the Father, taking us with him to the Father. he carried us to God.
Yeah.
Man, what a beautiful picture of what it means to be holy. How am I holy, we might ask?
That's so good.
Because of Jesus Christ.
Mm.
That's the first answer.
Yeah. So and that's where we've been at in the
Right.
sermon series to
Until-
catch everybody
till
up.
me.
Yeah, until Carlton came through. But yeah, so Christ does all that work. He in a definitive way, right? Transforms our broken mirror
Right.
and gives us a rightness, right? What is lacking is the experience of that in our own lives, because as we've talked about, these old sin patterns, these habits, the Paul talks about it, the flesh, this body of flesh still wages war against God's spirit that is transforming inward from the inside out all of our persons. And so this pursuit of holiness is what we're called to. So God says we are holy definitively, and now we're to pursue holiness. You mentioned a second ago, outside of Christ, there's no way you can pursue holiness. You've got a better chance of jumping from California and landing in Japan.
That's right.
On your feet. So there's no chance at that. But when Christ does his work, he now definitively says, you are holy.
That's right.
You are holy. His spirit is placed within us. But now we're called to pursue holiness.
Yeah.
So why would, if God has said I'm holy, why would I be motivated to pursue holiness? And maybe that's what we're getting at with the idea of holiness. Because again, I think for a young guy who was a believer, I didn't understand why I would ever want to pursue holiness. I totally understood unholiness. And maybe it's just that the enemy, because of the fallen nature of this world, is so good at advertising himself. He's got all the advertisements, right? This is why you should pursue unholiness. And maybe the church hasn't done as good of a job with advertising why you should pursue holiness, right?
Yeah.
So talk about some of those reasons. Why would we encourage people? Why would we say you should pursue holiness?
I think it's because that's what we were created to do. Like, we were created to image our God. We were created to do that, and by pursuing holiness, we are living out what we are created for. And that's like what we're seeing in Romans 6 is Paul making sure that you understand who you are now. Like, this is who you are, and now this is how you are to go and live that out. And we can't just pursue holiness the way that we've seen the monks do that, or even other religions, to where it's just these disciplines in our life that are going to create this holiness or seclusion away from the world. I think you may have spoken on that too, in one of your sermons. Like, we can't just seclude ourselves. Our heart has to be made new in Christ, and out of that new heart, then all these disciplines, they can be effective in our life to help our heart live out who we are. And finding out that, like, man, why would a horse not want to live out what it was created to live out? Like, why would anything, like, if you were to make something with your own hands, wouldn't you want it to function the way you intended it to function and to be what it was? And so that's how God looks on us. Like, he created us in such a way to image him, and then when we're not living in conformity to that, we're not properly functioning the way God made us to function. And then when we are pursuing that holiness in him, I think our Father looks on us smiling, going, hey, that's what I intended you to be. Hey, this is how I created you to.
Love that.
To, we can think back to the way that Adam and Eve in the garden, like living that in union with Christ, or with him in the garden.
Yeah.
It was right. And so we're in, the already not yet. We're pursuing that where we are now. So trying to live the way we were created.
Love that.
Yeah, so often too much of our conversation is what we don't get to do because we're trying to be holy.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, you raised teenagers.
Yeah.
What speak to how do you like get a teenager to stop worrying about the FOMO, right? The fear of what am I going to miss out on if I'm pursuing holiness.
FOMO's real, man.
Yeah.
FOMO's
It
real.
really is, and I think what we all suffer from it because we're so confused in our mind about what really is human thriving. Are we just trying to get through the world and have a cheap pleasure in this moment? or are we trying to thrive in this life? Because what our Father wants for us is to thrive.
Yeah.
He doesn't want us to just get a cheap pleasure, a one-off good time for a feeling for a little season of time. He's given us the promise and the guarantee through Christ of not only pleasure in this life, but as Psalm 16 says, pleasure forevermore.
Yeah.
That's what he's offering us, and he's calling us to, and he's encouraging us to through the scriptures. So I think the shift for us as teenagers or as older people is, okay, just take it out of a like moral category, talk about just diet. Like that's a big thing to think about. I have an opportunity to eat a Snickers right now.
Man, they're so good.
Man, they taste so good, right? And then 30 minutes later, there's a sugar crash. It's not going to feel good. And it didn't really it's 200 calories. One regular size bar is 200 calories, and it really didn't give me any nutritional value. Not much vitamins, not much of anything I needed for fuel for my body. So now I got to eat again. So I ate 200 calories that are dead. They're worthless. They're not helping me at all. And now, man, I'm going to go work out. So now I got to eat 200 calories of chicken. So now I've taken in 400 calories. I really just needed 200 calories. So it was it was deadness. It was a weight. It wasn't any good. Versus, man, I'm not going to have that Snickers. But the reason I'm not going to have that Snickers is because my body was created to eat chicken and rice and thrive. Like when I eat that chicken and rice, it metabolizes into making my energy level goes up and stays up. My ability to pick up heavy weight increases. The muscle mass that I want increases. The fat levels drop on my body, and I feel more energetic throughout the whole day. And I do that over and over and over again. All of a sudden, it's like somebody puts a Snickers in front of somebody that's committed to it and lives that lifestyle. They're not even enticed by it anymore. Everybody else is eating Snickers, and they're not feeling missing out. They're saying, "Why would
Y'all
I
are
do
missing
that?
out.
Y'all are the ones missing out." What?
That's good.
And so we got to change our mindset, and that shift is difficult. I don't think we need to deny to our teenager that it is difficult to live in this world as an exile, as a sojourner, by the created standards, because the standards of this world are so broken that they're going to feel like, oh man, but Dad, I'm missing out on that glimpse, that look, that pleasure, that taste, that thing, touch. I'm missing it. And it is a shift.
Well, because let's be honest. I mean, even if the whole school is wearing paper bags on their heads and you don't have a paper bag on your head,
Right.
I mean, you feel
You're the weirdo.
ostracized. Right. Where is your paper
and
bag?
with the diet analogy, like how many times, I know I do it all the time, where I'm like, man, I'm going to feel terrible from this, but I'm going to drink this Smell Yellow.
Yeah.
And one sip in, I feel the effects of it, and I keep going. And that's us with sin as well. Like, I shouldn't do this. I'm gonna have to repent of this, or this is not imaging Christ, but I'm gonna do it anyway. You know, like,
Exactly.
it's just,
And think of that, taking it on out a little further. So I ate a Snickers today, and we're not anti-Snickers. I'm just using that as an example.
Sure.
So I eat a Snickers today. Well, then tomorrow at that same time, guess what my body's going to tell me? My mind's going to tell me, well, you need a Snickers. And then the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So
well, even the store you bought that Snickers from, when you go buy it,
you think about
Oh,
the Snickers.
hey,
You're like, man, that
I could go in there
was
and get
fun. Last time I stopped in there, I got me a Snickers. I'm going to get me a Snickers. And then before long, you think you can't drive past the store without stopping and getting a Snickers. It starts to convince and rewire and rethink. And so same way with sin. If I give in to sin today, how much progress have I lost? Only maybe a half a step, only maybe one step in my pursuit of Christ. But then the next day, that same thing happens, and then it starts to multiply, and then it becomes, I can't do away with it. I can't get separated.
I know a lot of people have heard this little saying before, but I was revisiting it last night. You sow a thought, you reap an act. You sow an act, you reap a habit, and you sow a habit, you reap a character.
man.
Yeah.
And just how quickly that goes to your point. But let's jump off of the Snickers for a minute for everybody that's now conscience is bound and for that
We're not trying to bind your
for
conscience.
that candy bar they're going to have at lunch
That's right.
today.
I might have a
Enjoy your
Snickers.
candy bar, folks.
I might have one today.
Yeah, I may do it just to say yeah.
Hey, put it in the freezer and then get it out, man.
Yeah. But I mean that goes across the line with everything. I mean, when we argue with our spouse, right?
Yeah.
We know that these words that are in my head. In fact, I was watching a psychiatrist last night talk about how everybody has very violent thoughts and mean words come into their head. He was like, you need a discipline not to say those things. But we know, like we just believe in our mind, yes, if I say them, then it will work what I'm trying to work
Right.
in her or in him. And yet as soon as it comes out and we see the damage it does, we go, that wasn't good. Now I have to clean up that mess, right?
Yeah.
And that's how it is really with everything across the board. When we are not holy, when we don't act in a holy way, because we would say that God acting in a holy way never has regrets.
Oh, no.
Never
No.
acts in perfect love or perfect justice or perfect mercy and goes, that was probably unhelpful. It never happens. And so our pursuit of holiness is going to leave us with less regret, right?
Yeah.
Like to your point, you snuck it in there, but you said they're the ones missing out, right? And that's really what I think the transformation that has to take place. And like you mentioned, it's not easy for it to happen, but for our bodies to shift, our persons to shift from what we can see to what we are being told from the scriptures, what
That's
we
right.
believe, right?
That's right.
I think not only the fear of missing out, that FOMO being real, also like a lot of us have trained ourselves by either our own selves doing it or external factors, other people, but living to please other people. So living to try to not, I think we think we might be pursuing holiness, but we're just trying to live in a way that others might see us as holy. We're not actually pursuing holiness as God is holy. When we are pursuing holiness, when we are living a life that is loving God and loving our neighbors, like that's being holy. Like he says, all the law is summed up in these two things: loving God and loving your neighbor.
That's good.
So we will be pleasing our neighbor, maybe not according to their pleasures, but in the sight of God and ultimately pleasing them. We would be, by pursuing holiness, we're pleasing God and we're pleasing our neighbor because we're loving them.
That's
we're loving
good.
them with love of God, love of Christ. We're not pleasing just their needs in the moment. And I think that weighs on a lot of people. Like, we can easily talk about some real tangible sins that are easy to point out, but living to please other people, like I don't think we all realize how often we're doing that.
Yeah.
Even as kids, like a lot of us as parents, we're trying to train our children to please us, not to please our Father in heaven. And so that's just something we have to really consider and think on, and like what are our standards that we're placing out there for ourselves, for our children, for others that we're discipling. Live a life to please God.
I know I've said it before. I've quoted him before, but Paul Tripp says it's shocking how the church's dirty little secret is how much she does that is motivated out of fear rather than faith, and that's so true.
Yeah.
But let's, with our time we have left, let's talk about practical holiness, like maybe even practical tips for holiness. And I'll kind of kick us one off here, and maybe you guys can jump on of things you've done in your life or things other people have told you. Just recently, I was talking to someone, and they told me that they think it's probably best they get off Instagram. And the reason they think it's best that they get off Instagram is because every time they get on Instagram, they are persuaded by all of the shopping things that come up and all of the cutesy clothing and ideas for stuff. And what they've seen that kind of work in them is a constant look at like what I don't have. And so they've just said, you know what I have is awesome. But when I'm constantly looking at Instagram of what I don't have, it's stirring things up inside of me that just aren't good, right? And so this person has made a wise choice to say, hey, I'm gonna maybe limit my time that I'm constantly saturating myself in that realm. Other thoughts on those kind of things, just practical things that can help us with holiness?
Well, I think maybe a little level before that would be, we tend to think of holiness in terms of list of do's and don'ts. The Bible speaks of holiness as a pursuit of a person and a relationship.
That's good.
So we're pursuing Christ.
Yeah.
We're pursuing Christ likeness. So rather than seeing it as, hey, I can go on Instagram and I can look at all the things I don't have, not only is it good to limit those things, but to fill the house with the good things. And it's not always, as you've said before, Corey, it's not always just sit down with my Bible. That's excellent.
Yeah.
It's good. Sometimes it is, though, I'm going to put down the Instagram and actually go out into the beautiful creation which God gave me and sit in the sunshine.
That's good.
And feel the sun and know that God created that to warm me, to give me vitamin D, man, to enjoy the beauty of it. That to see by it all the things and just thinking about God's goodness in that.
That's good.
Replacing that, I don't have that trinket. What I do have is an entire world that God created
So
for me.
many good
Man,
things.
what's so good? He gave me this backyard. Look at this backyard. I mean, all the colors, all the life, all the energy. My kids are in this backyard. Man, I got my kids, And so now all of a sudden I've replaced. I don't have these things that everybody has, and it may be fine things, but I just don't have them.
Yeah.
To, man, look at all that God's given me.
Yeah.
So that's a move towards holiness.
And
Christ never walked into a situation and went, God said I couldn't have these things. Jesus walked in saying, look at this.
I love that you brought that up. What he's referring to is a text message I got from one day from a guy, and he said, man, I need to honestly stop watching porn and read my Bible. And I'm like, well, yeah, I agree with that, but I don't know if that's a fair swap. We just constantly have that tendency to just go, well, I just need to stop doing these things, right? And just do the holy things, the reading the Bible and the praying. But no, we need to be doing that holiness of God's character would be out causing his creation to flourish instead of tearing it down. And so what are some, planting a garden, right? Those kind of things. Yeah. That's excellent.
Well, or just thinking through, okay, I think one way to pursue holiness, one practical way is asking the question, how is this emulating God's character, this action or this thought? How is this putting me in connection with God's community and his people? How is this taking God's message to someone? How is this me enjoying God at the very core? How is this activity, thought, word, deed, whatever it is, causing me to love God more? So now we're getting into a lot of openness rather than closed off.
I love that.
It's just openness. It's all openness.
Kevin DeYoung in his book Holiness, The Hole in Our Holiness, actually says the one thing he's done is ask himself, whatever he's doing, can I thank God for this? Can I thank God for this? And if I can't thank God for this, then maybe that's not a good thing to be doing. But I mean, what are you doing, and can you be thankful for it afterwards?
Yeah, I got two things that have really helped me and are continuing to help me. Is some practical advice my dad gave me when I was going into college was it's never good for somebody young to have too much money or too much time, and both of those things together just cause a lot of trouble.
Man.
And so I was paying for things on my own, and I was working through college, and that took away a lot of idle time for me that I could have been doing sinful things or self-gratifying things. So too much time that a lot of us carve out time for ourselves, and we might think we're the most connected, as the most connected population ever, but we are so disconnected because all of this social media technology, it's turned life inward. Where we are so isolated, and when you isolate yourself and you're not spending that isolation you're not going to the garden to pray with your Father. When you're isolating, usually you're running to sin, and so not having idle time, God gave us hands to work with. He gave us minds to think deeply on things with, and He gave us people to spend time with. Go enjoy life, like Carlton was talking about, getting outside. That's something that I really enjoy, is being outside working on something and seeing something tangible that I had finished, a finished project. And I enjoy the process of working a lot more than seeing the final project.
I love that.
Not that I spend all my time there, and that's not what I'm worshiping, but I'm trying to use the things that God gave me that I enjoy to worship Him.
Yeah.
One thing is we just built a chicken coop. I mentioned this last time, but like I loved like thinking through how to lock this nesting box and how to make it just functional, and in that I'm trying to worship God with what He's given me in my hands and all of my history of working on things and just kind of piddling around, just trying to use that to glorify Him and look at that and not go, look what David did, but like, God, I hope I was worshiping You in what You gave me with my time, with the way I was spending that with my kids, the way my wife was there. So not having too much idle time. God's given you something that you enjoy. Go figure out what that is and use it to worship Him. And the other thought is understanding what's not for you. This has been very helpful for me, especially, and it's something I'll encourage guys with lustful thoughts, struggling with pornography. Like early on in my Christian life, when pornography was a struggle, and trying to get out of that, like it was just, I don't remember if I read it somewhere or if something that God just really worked in my life, but understanding that any woman other than my wife is not for me. And so when I look on those things, and it could be the Snickers bar, it could be any sin, like that is not for me because of who I am in Christ and because I have a wife that I'm supposed to rightly look on. Anything else is not for me. And so practically, if a woman were to walk by and it catch my attention, where my mind has to go is that's not for me. I have a wife that I can look on rightly and pursue. So why would I pursue anything else?
Another practical encouragement for us, I think, from the Scriptures is Christ can come at any moment. So another question I ask myself is, I love Jesus. I know Jesus' love for me. He's displayed it, and He shows it over and over again. And so if He splits the eastern sky and comes right at this moment, is this what I wanted Him to find me doing? Now you might think, well, then, Carlton, what that means is I need to go feed the poor 100% of the time and preach the gospel 100% of the time. And why would I even be doing my job? Well, because He cares about your job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if you're a mechanic today and you're working on a car, Jesus cares about that. And if He splits the eastern sky and comes again while you're working on that car right there in the grease and the muck and the mud, but you're doing it with a joyful heart unto the Lord, He's smiling at that, man. He's like, man, look, I found my man being faithful down there.
Yeah.
If you're a mom changing a diaper and he comes again at that very moment, he's smiling at that. He's saying, man, she's doing exactly what I created her to do. So it's not just pious, it's reality to say, hey, I wouldn't want my mom or my grandmom to walk in on me saying that or doing that. Well, take that to the highest level.
What about Christ?
What about Jesus? Yeah. And then to pair that with, He could come again, and He does see and hear all things.
Yep.
So even if He doesn't split the sky today, because some people be like, well, He's not coming back. He's not coming back. Well, He's here.
Yeah.
So when I'm having a conversation with Corey and I take that conversation to places it shouldn't go, or I think things I shouldn't think, He is seeing and hearing everything. So that's, again, a motivation not out of a threat, but out of, man, I don't want to do anything that puts a separation between He and I. Yeah. I don't want to do anything that He would come back and say, that's not what I created you for.
Right.
I want to be doing things that do that.
I think it's a devotional. Help me out here. Every moment holy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's, I don't know.
It's like little prayers and things that we say over every moment of every event of life.
Situation.
So there's two volumes of them. It's unbelievable.
So you got that, but just even that thought, right? From what you're saying, that's what sparked in my mind was, why should every moment not be holy?
Yeah, well, in those two volumes, every moment holy is constantly saying, like, the dedication of a home, the preparing of a meal, the taking of a bath, all of these things, and it's little prayers that you could say over those things. So if you can't say a prayer over it, then why am I doing it?
Yeah,
that's kind of.
And I even think, like, Casey and I were arguing last night. And I think back, how can even those moments be holy,
Yeah.
right? And they can.
They can.
We saw that our Savior came and he never sinned. He flipped tables in the temple. He disagreed with his disciples. He disagreed with his opponents.
Right.
He disagreed with the people he wanted to come to know him, right? But every moment was holy. And so that means every moment is always building up and flourishing and causing wonderful things to happen, bringing in the character of our God and not excusing it. So we're at the end of our time today. We're going to share something with you guys, hopefully Sunday, I think. I'm going to try to get it out. But this is really good. Hole in Our Holiness by Kevin DeYoung. If you've never read the book, very, very good. But he gives 40 biblical motivations for holiness. And you guys mentioned some of these. They haven't got to read through them yet. I just showed them to them. But we're going to try to get you this list Sunday so that you can just maybe even read through these devotionally. Our holiness, our pursuit of holiness is not going to be kept up by just one thing. It's going to be a myriad of constant motivations that we see from our God giving us. This is why you should pursue it. Just like you do your kids, right? You don't tell your kids all the time, you should be good because it's right. Just because it's right? Like there's so many other reasons. And so our God does the same thing. But thanks for joining us today. We hope it's been a blessing to you, and we'll see you again next time on the podcast.